Hey everybody, it's Thursday night, which means it's time for Shop Talk. I'm Josh Olive with Haven Comics, and we have got an awesome show in store for you guys, so stick around for just a minute while we play this, and while you're doing that, feel free to hit the like button and all that jazz. You know what to do. Alrighty. I would like to first to let everybody know that we have a little bit of a change up from the normal show tonight because Alan has COVID, and so he is not going to be here, and he doesn't get to talk to our guest, which is a pity for him, but awesome for me because I don't have to wade through all of Alan asking quirky and strange questions, and I can just ask what I want to ask. That said, tonight we have an awesome guest. He's one of my favorite comic book writers, but he writes for movies and TV and all kinds of things. Just an all-around phenomenal storyteller. And I want to just go ahead and introduce him, and we'll start the show. So we bring you none other than Mr. Paul Jenkins. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I guess I'm doing better than poor old Alan. Classic Alan. You know, gets COVID right at the wrong time, doesn't it?
That is a classic Alan. That's exactly what that is. Yeah, just where are you? It's COVID.
Yep.
But yeah, so for anybody, and I can't imagine that a lot of comic book people don't know who you are, but for anybody who doesn't, how did you get started down this path? I mean, we don't have a whole lot of comic creators that I'm aware of who come from Wales, for starters. So for anybody who's going like, what is that accent exactly? That's Welsh.
Not quite, actually.
Not a Welsh accent, but English. But
I'll clarify that. Yeah.
It's not a Welsh. He's not Welsh speaking Welsh to us. He's speaking English. You don't speak Welsh, people.
No. My family. So on my dad's side, we're Welsh by descent, right? Like Jenkins is a Welsh name. My brother Richard is quite possibly the 30th Richard Jenkins in a row. My family never left a small town called Monestreslwyn in the mid-central Wales in the Black Mountains. So on my dad's side, you have a bunch of dead Welsh coal miners, right? And it's not very exotic. But, one thing that was pretty interesting was that my uncle Derek, he was the person in the British Library years ago who went from the old parish records and digitized them. And when we did the genealogy on my dad's side, it took about 4 minutes to trace it back to like 1106, the first census, right?
Holy smokes.
They were originally Richard Shenko, and it means son of John, and crazy, so classic Alan move. Well, Alan.
Hey, Dan, how are you?
But, on my mum's side, all over the place, right? Like English, who knows, right? Like they're all from everywhere. Half of them didn't register anything, a bunch of lunatics that and so you've got this like weird mix of like one sort of like Welsh village and then pretty much everywhere. So I grew up in the West Country of England pretty much. I didn't actually live in Wales.
And well, I do have to tell you, I lived in England from 85 to 89. Mm-hmm. And we went to Wales at one point. We're headed to the Snowdon area and all that. And we took the scenic route. And then somewhere or other, my dad got off of the scenic route. And so we were on these little 1-lane roads just winding and twisting through the mountains. It was April, but it was still snowing. Mm-hmm. And we came up to a place where they were doing construction on the road. And they had all this equipment blocking the road. And they had to move it so that we could get past. And so this one fella comes over to talk to us while they were moving all the equipment. And my dad goes, he didn't say anything to us, but he's like to my mom, he's like, watch this. And so the guy comes over and dad rolls his window down and dad goes, I think we took a wrong turn. Which way is London?
Nice.
He said that guy is talking about that stupid American to this day.
Yeah. Because one thing, there is no route other than the scenic route in Wales. Let's be clear, right? I remember, when I was a kid, we were being Dolgelly in North Central Wales, and to get there, like taking the train up the coast is actually cool, right? It's beautiful, it's lovely, and all that. But when you try to drive, it takes you like 3 hours to get from, say, London to the border of Wales. and then another 3 hours to get like 30 miles inland in Wales, because
it's all this
around the mountains. And it's a tough journey, but it's worth it. There's, when you're in the mountains, and I remember, there we'd have like, I mean, they herd with corgis, right? They actually herd cows. That's what those little dogs are bred for. But they got little stubby legs, and what they do is they ride them up the hill on their horses, on the saddles, and then once they're at the top of the hill, so they don't have to walk all the way up, then they herd the cows all the way down. And so it's really cool. Like, they're brilliant dogs, but they're, I don't know how they're bred that way. And you can see them; they get struck by the cows, and they just get up and start barking and keep going. They're really tough little dogs,
That's impressive. I will say, 35 years later, the countryside of Wales still holds a special place in my memory, because it was just exquisite. It was absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
Just lovely. The one thing that struck me as strange was it was lambing season. So you have all these little lambs running about, but they were all wearing like orange garbage bags.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why are the little lambs wearing garbage bags? It was the strangest thing, but it kept them warm and dry and all that stuff. So it was good, but it did look very odd out in these beautiful landscapes and pastures and sheep, and orange garbage bag clad lambs running everywhere.
When you've been on a mountain in Wales, and my brother and I did this quite a bit. I remember being at the top of a mountain one time, and he and I climbed up the top. And then it started to rain. And when it rains, I used to live in Massachusetts when I first came to the States, and you'd have these lake effect snow. You'd have 18 inches of snow in a day and biting cold wind, but you're not as cold as when you're wet and cold. And so the rain starts coming down like needles on top of those mountains. And I remember Richard, my brother, and I like kind of slid down the mountain to try to get home. And we got in with just hypothermia. And I've never taken so long to warm up in my life. And I believe that. That's why the lambs have those little garbage bags on, actually, is because, they'll die if they don't,
Oh, that makes total sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, beautiful, beautiful territory among Austria and places in Germany and France and the Pyrenees and the Alps. I would put the countryside in Wales up against any of it. It's just exquisite.
Yeah.
Love
All right. Well, we're happy to help.
We do appreciate that contribution to the world. So thank you. But speaking of which, so you come from this long line of coal miners or miners and such, and then so how do you come out of this and go, I'm gonna be a writer and a creator, and where does that come from?
So I told you backstage, that I actually have a pretty interesting origin story. And how it plays out is that basically, my father left when I was 5 years old. And so my mum was a single mum. She raised my brother and I. And if anyone has ever read The Origin of Wolverine, you actually have a little bit of my life story in that first issue. Yeah.
Okay. I see that now. Yeah.
The kid at the bottom of the hill, his dog is me, and we lived on a farm for some time. We used to walk to school because basically we had nothing. We were the poorest kids I've met, and it was really like bartering with the local gypsy folk who we lived with and around. They would tend to like steal a sheep or something and then slaughter it, and they bring it over to my mum's house, and mum would make pies because she's really good at making pastry, and then barter that. And I was 7 years old when I started learning how to snare rabbits just for food for us. We usually didn't have electricity most of the time. So you think about that, and I've said this many times, like many people would think about that type of deprivation as being really bad, but I didn't notice it. I didn't have any sense that it would be any different than that. My mum is a unique human being. She's a very unique person, and
she would have to be.
Yeah.
Wow.
Super intelligent, but her intelligence was very suppressed. She's a child of the Second World War, baby in the Second World War. Coming out of it, prevailing theories was that you get married and you have kids and you're a housewife. And mum was like, nope, I'm not that, because my mum is eccentric to the point of bonkers, right? She's a delightfully dotty old lady now, right? She's but so being raised, like we were sort of raised feral, and we almost raised ourselves in some ways. And there are so many things that my mum did that really put us into a place where we saw the world in a way that most people do not see the world. You know, we
forced you to be resourceful. It sounds like.
Yep, you had to be super resourceful. You traded. You know, it's funny. Like, I lived in two worlds, and I look back at my own writing, and one thing that I write about quite a lot is living in two worlds, like having two existences. So, for example, we would walk to school, my brother and I, and it was 2 miles, I think, every day. And we go across the fields, and that's because my mum couldn't afford the bus fare to get to school, and so we'd have to walk. But, you know, we showed up, rain, snow, shine. There'd be kids that lived like 500 yards from the school that didn't make it, but we would. And the Jenkins boys, my brother and I, would just walk across the hill every day. We'd come along that thing. And across that walk, you know, we saw foxes and stoats and weasels, and you know, we lived this like life in the country and picked elderberries that my brother made into. My brother was like 9 years old when he made his first batch of wine.
Wow.
Yeah, it's crazy, right? And you know, we just kind of grew up as country people, and like my brother still makes like lots of scrumpy. He has an old barn that he wants to turn into a cider press. You know, a lot of that art is lost. Like, you know, one of the things you do with cider, when you make really hard scrumpy cider, you use apples that are spoiled. You actually get ones that are rotting a little bit, and you have them kind of ferment. So we knew all of that stuff, and that's the stuff that we've always done. And so even to this day, my brother lives in a caravan with no electricity, and my family are like that, and it's okay. I love them very much, and so I have this anecdote, and if anybody is, you know, reading my work, is if you ever see Hellblazer number 97, it's about John Constantine walking into a forest, and he meets a gypsy called Tom, and Tom was someone that I knew. Tom was really like the only type of father figure that I had, and he was an old boy that lived out there, and he really wanted me to be a country boy, and he used to say it all the time, "You're a country boy." And he taught me all these things about the countryside that I don't think people see. They, you know, why do swallows fly high in the summer? Because they're catching the bugs that are up on the, you know, when you sting yourself on a stinging nettle, if you look right next to the nettles, which is this like poisonous shrub that we have, there's a thing called
I learned that the hard way when I lived.
Yeah, I bet you did, because it's not fun, right?
Don't mow the grass wearing shorts.
That's it.
When you go through a nettle bed, because we don't have those here at all.
Right. And it'll get you.
Oh, I learned very quickly.
So right next to a nettle bed, I could have helped you. There would be a thing called a dock leaf. It's a kind of leaf that grows right where the nettles are, and you go over, you pick a dock leaf, and you just rub it up like that, and then rub it against the skin, and it takes away the sting. But one way that you can, I remember Tom doing this with me, one way that you can face your fears, because I'm a little kid, I've got no dad around, you know, mum's gone most of the time, all over the place. And so being in that environment where you got no electricity, you don't know where you're going to eat, that kind of stuff, you have a lot of like worry. But I didn't really, in some ways. I just kind of dealt with it. But I remember him getting me one day and said, with a nettle, and he said, just grab it. And he said, if you grab it, you'll understand what I mean, but you got to believe me. You got to grab this nettle. And so eventually I really summoned up my fear, and I just grabbed it, and it didn't sting me. And I was like, okay. And it turns out that the reason it doesn't sting you if you grab it is they have these tiny poisonous little barbs, right, that get into your skin. Now, if you grab it, you crush the barbs, and it doesn't go inside you, right? And so it's almost a metaphor for facing the things that you're afraid of. And so all of this like country teaching is there. And so the big thing in Hellblazer 97 that I wrote about, I've had an interesting life, and this is probably one of my biggest core memories of my childhood. My mum woke me up at like 2 or 3 in the morning, and it was snowing, and it had snowed, and it was completely white, and there was a full moon. And Tom was there, and Tom wanted me to be a country boy. And so he took me out, and we sat in an orchard for about an hour. And all he did was just uncap his booze and then put it back. And I had some hot drink of some kind. And after an hour, the boy came, the badger. And you will never meet anyone who's ever seen a badger, let alone somebody who's had a badger walk around his feet.
No. Definitely not.
And so, you know, growing up in that, for Richard and I, we lived in what you could call magic, you know, that fairy magic was like real to us because, you know, we lived in a place near a place called Binkham Bumps. And so the legend was that you go out there, it was like the burial mounds of English kings, and they were in our backyard.
Yeah.
And so we would go out there and listen. And if you listen at midnight, you could hear fairies playing the violin. And so there's all these legends and all this stuff. That house that I lived in, when we moved down there, was on a Roman road. And so if you turned left, you went to my school. And if you went right, you started walking to the old town of Dorchester, which is a Roman town, along a cobbled road that was in a straight line across the chalk hills. That kind of magic is what made me a writer.
That's phenomenal. It's the first time I've ever heard that. I didn't realize that that was your background, but I can see, as I think about it, a lot of those kind of elements that creep into your writing. Sure. Yeah. I'm particularly thinking, since you mentioned it, the Wolverine origin story.
Yep.
And the two worlds that exist there.
Yep.
And then the twist of who you think the is going to be, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute. That was really, really interesting.
Spoiler alert.
No, I mean, that's been out a few years. If people are
I think people know it. Yeah.
They should write it. Brandy says, how could you not become a writer? Yeah, absolutely. I don't know that his brother's a writer, but
no, my brother, okay, so this is why it's so cool, right? My brother's a tree surgeon. He's arboriculturalist as well.
God, so what my brother does, that's an incredible thing to be able to do. I don't understand how those guys can read trees and understand them, but it's amazing.
And so what he does, for example, in Great Britain, we have hedgerows, and those hedgerows are thousands of years old. That's a hedgerow that just stays alive. What my brother would do, like, he came to the States to visit me. The first time he came to the States, he looked at the tree surgery here, and he was just like appalled. He couldn't believe that they did this. Because what he will do is take the growth and fold it in amongst itself, so that now when it's growing, it always grows to itself. And that stunts it and retards its growth a little bit.
Instead of just lopping it off and hoping.
And so he came here and he'd see like a piece of a tree lopped off so a phone line could go past it, and just was like, you don't need to do any of that stuff, right? But, he has any number of things that he's done. He's tried to keep old apple strains alive. He's
that's awesome.
So if you go back to my work on Hellblazer, one of the things that I did, I was writing about that, it's like Jamie Delano wrote very much about politics, and sort of like that kind of thing. Garth Ennis wrote very much about religion and the Catholic Church and his disillusionment with it. And then it was me, and I was a complete unknown. I broke into comics in a way that nobody can break in, because I literally just went to San Diego and asked the guy, the editor of Hellblazer, if I could write Hellblazer, and he asked me, what had I written, and I said, well, I haven't actually written anything before. And then they let me try out. I don't know why. And then
that's incredible, because that is certainly not normal.
It's not how you do it. And then about 6 weeks later, they just called me up and went, okay, well, congratulations, you're the new writer of Hellblazer. And I had no sense of what I had done. And wow. I wrote so much about it, but there's this one story that we did. It's all supernatural stuff, but I wrote about the things I knew, the things I'd seen. We wrote about Jack in the Green, who is a very important figure in our mythologies, in a sense, in the countryside. Jack is the foliate face, the face that you see in every tree. He's always watching you, But at one point, and this does mean a lot to me, right? It means a lot to me. At one point, so I had this character, all these characters were people I knew, all of John's supporting cast, and one of them was Rich the Punk, which is my brother.
Beautiful.
And my brother's just a total lunatic punk. He is just bonkers. Right? He's just like my mum. And if I needed an idea, sometimes I would call my brother, and I'd just say, what are you doing? There's actually one whole thing where he was practicing. He wanted to be the world's first punk ski jumper. I kid you not. And I called him, and he worked out how to put some skis on top of a Morris Minor, an old car. He was trying to work out if he could stay on the skis, and then he's on the phone, on his cell phone, like an early one, trying to explain it to me, and then you hear this noise, and it's like he screams, and he's fallen off. No. He's fallen off. Right? And then there was another time that he called me. This is really funny. Again, this is a family show, so I won't say exactly what he said, but he called me one time, and he said, you never guess where I am. And I said, you're on top of Stonehenge. And he said, oh, it's like,
how do you know? Yeah.
I said, it's June 21st, because I knew he'd be on top of Stonehenge. Right. And all of a sudden, you hear this noise in the background, and there's a big noise. And I'm like, are you getting arrested? And he's like, well, they're trying to, but they won't get up here. He's up on top of Stonehenge.
Oh my God.
And the police are trying to throw them all off, and they're kicking at the police.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
So when you come from that kind of background and that family, like you don't think of things, it writes itself. And one of the stories that I was most proud of was that John Constantine ends up going to find the head of Bran the Blessed, which is from the Mabinogion, which is the original Welsh legend that became sort of Arthurian legend.
Yep.
And as he goes to do it, he realizes he's told by Jack in the Green, "You can't go, John. It's not for you. The only person who can go is the true descendant of the King of England." And it turns out it's Rich the Punk.
Oh, lovely.
And so Rich has to go. It's a whole episode about Rich, complete comedy of errors, just going around. And what I thought was really, it still moves me personally to this day. Like I wrote it and it moves me emotionally. Because I know one thing, right, that most people don't, which is the true kings of England and Wales and that are us, me and my brother and the people that are from there. And, you know, in the story, John finds the head inside a wood, like a little copse inside a wood, a real small clearing. And at that moment, he knows who he is. He knows he's the descendant of the king. You know, he is the king. So a couple of years ago, my father passed away. I went to go see him before he passed away. And it was sort of like, I always have to do that, go visit my family. So my brother wants to go drinking with me and he wants to go out. And this is the evening with my brother. This is pretty much an average evening with my brother. Go over, see him. You know, his fridge, because he lives in a caravan with electricity, his fridge is like a wheelbarrow outside. So he's got all his beer. So we pull it out of the thing, we drink a few beers, and now we go off to the pub. And the pub's in that direction, because in Britain, it's like you can just see the lights. There's no sound, there's no grasshoppers. You go flying over to the pub, and by the time we arrive, we are like traffic lights. I've always said the bottom half of us is mud, right? So we're brown. The middle part of us is like wet. And the top half of us is just covered in blood because he's taken us through all these bramble bushes. And so we're just torn up.
So that's why you had to drink a few beers before you left.
Yeah, they drink a few beers before you leave. And so now we get there. And the first half an hour, at least, in the pub was him apologizing to the local lord of the manor for whatever it was that he had done the last time he was there. So it took him about half an hour to persuade the guy that we could drink there. My brother's over from England. And then so we closed the pub and we came out and we were, we certainly were slightly the worse for wear when we came out. And my brother says, "Do you want to go see Steve?" And I said, "Yeah, that sounds great. Who's Steve? I don't care." And so we stagger around the fields, and eventually we go past trees that are maybe 2,000 years old. We go down by the old thing. We walk across a Roman villa that's been under excavation and into my brother's land that has ancient roundhouses on it. We go across the way. It's amazing. And then we sit down. He says, "Sit right here." And I'm like, "Okay." He says, "Well, here's Steve." And we were sitting on a grave that had been overturned maybe 2 years before, of an English king, or they think he was a king, who had been buried. So in those old days, the sea was higher and it had come inland. So it's called the Salton Sea. And they presumably buried him on the banks of the sea. And then the sea receded and now he was in the middle of a field. And so we were laying on Steve, and my brother told me, they excavated him a couple of years ago, and the locals were so upset that he'd been excavated. They were like, "You have no right to take him away from there. Put him back." And so they had to come back with Steve and bury him exactly how they found him, with his head facing a certain way so he could look at the sunrise, all of these things. So Josh, that is magic. That's real.
I've been transported to a different world just through you describing this, and my imagination is firing on all cylinders right now.
Right. So how do you become a writer? Well, you live well. And one of my favorite photos, and I'll let this go, but one of my favorite photos is a picture of my brother and I on a hillside, and he's pointing out to something. And at that moment, what he was actually saying to me was, "Do you see? We're looking at a valley, and there's a hill in the middle of the valley, like a big chalk hill." And he said, "What do you see?" And I say, I see a hill, He said, "Now think about this, right? 14, 15, 1700 years ago, maybe, that was the Salton Sea. So that was underwater. Now what you're looking at?" And I'm like, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I was looking at Avalon. That's where they sailed his body, whoever he was. That's where he would have gone, right to that that's where they sailed him to. So when they said that he sailed to Avalon, it's probably on the Salton Sea, whoever that figure was historically. You know, and so, you know, to me, it's like very lucky to have grown up like that, and it fueled everything, and it gave me the confidence and to be able to do what I do.
That does explain a lot about you and the things that you write and the general way that you approach things, I think. That's incredible. So you take all that. How did you end up in the States?
Just like I do everything. Just like I do everything. Just like I do everything, right?
Your brother built you a boat.
Sort of by accident. I left home when I was 11. I left that when I was 11 because I had an opportunity to go to a boarding school that really got me out of the potential for issues. You know, I think I just got done for like breaking into cars because my
at 11.
Yeah, my family, you know, and I was a really clever little kid. I was a kid that could walk into my school and just do my sums and then just give them to all the other kids and they just copy the answers and everybody got 10 out of 10. Like I was that kid. And one night, and this, you know, it shouldn't reflect too badly on my mom, so I hope it doesn't, but we were feral and my mum was trying to like find who she was, I suppose, as a person, and she's very, very eccentric. And so we were living in a student commune, and my math teacher apparently had headed home after a night at the pub himself. And on the way past this commune with all these students in it, one of the students asked him, "Do you want to come in for a beer?" And he said, "Well, that sounds lovely. I think I will. Thank you very much." Very
sounds great, kids.
Very British. And so he came in and he found me with a beer in my hand, and I was probably 10 or 11. And Mum got in a lot of trouble. And then we had to move to a house, and I got in trouble again for like breaking into cars with my friend Ian Fox, total pikey. And my teachers, I think, were just like, look, you know, this kid is just not this kid. Like this kid could be something else. And so they found a school in Britain that was founded by Edward VI in 1552. He's the son of Henry VIII. Mm-hmm. So they had four. By this time, they only had 4 scholarships to it. It was actually a very wealthy school, but I took the common entrance exam and got in. So I left home when I was 11, and I really never went back. When I was there, I wanted to study creative stuff, and so I studied to be an actor. And I went to college, but I found pretty quickly I liked filmmaking, and so I spent most of my time there. And then I heard about this job teaching music and drama to learning disabled children in America. And so I went to meet the people who ran it, and they said, yeah, come on over. So I did that. And then I went to Massachusetts just after and chasing a girl. And
that explains a lot.
I met the Ninja Turtle guys.
Yeah, you did.
And I had just broken my leg playing soccer. And so I couldn't work. You know, I was trying to be a musician for a living, but that's really hard. And I couldn't work at the job I had at the time. I think it was like waiting on tables or whatever you do as a musician.
Now, what kind of musician are we talking about?
I play guitar and, you know, I sort of, you know, play the keyboards and guitar and just stuff, you know. And like nowadays I make my own stuff and just get involved with it. But I was playing in a punk band. We were generally working around the Northeast. We had the drummer from a band called Dag Nasty in our thing, and the guitarist from the Marshes. And so we did okay. But I couldn't do that. And so I went upstairs to these guys I knew in town. They had done an album cover for us, which I still own. I still own the album cover that they did for us. And I said, hey, you know, you guys are pretty busy. They just got the rights to do the toy and the TV show. You guys are pretty busy, right? And they're like, yeah, man. I said, well, can I get a job? Because I can't do anything else. I've got a broken leg. And they went, yeah, we could use the help. And so I started working with Ninja Turtles. And within 3 or 4 months, this thing just was blowing up. It was just crazy.
So you came into the era when it was expanding from obscure black and white comic book by 2 kind of dudes up in a loft somewhere into the beginnings of this is a worldwide sensation that people are and it has continued to grow and metamorphosize itself to the present day, where it just keeps reinventing itself every few years. And the Ninja Turtles, but you were there at kind of the bow wave of when that first really began to happen.
Yep. And so I came in to do publishing initially, and then I ended up actually doing licensing, because they had one guy whose job in the office was to do. There were like 2 other employees. There was an office manager. She's a nice lady. She was legally blind, and I'm not sure where that was all coming from. But her husband, he was quite a character. He I think had some issues with substance, and so he couldn't really get his stuff done. So I tended to have to kind of take over a lot of the stuff he was trying to do. And so I was really young. I was like 22, I think. And I got to be quite friendly with Kevin, who was overwhelmed, and Pete was overwhelmed. And I got to know both of them. I used to go riding motorbikes with Pete. Sometimes he's very generous like that. We used to have fun and play paintball and things. But I got much more friendly with Kevin. And so Kevin one day said to me, look, I can't offer you the money you're getting here at Mirage, but would you like to come and help me start a comic book company called Tundra Publishing? And I said, I don't mind the pay cut, mate. I am not into there was so much money flying around Mirage. It was not my style. I didn't come from money, and I didn't really dig the behaviors that seemed to surround it. I used to get phone calls in the middle of the night from banks that would just say, is this Paul Jenkins? You work for Mirage? Yeah. Well, we're the National Bank of Peru. And I'd like, you're calling me at 2:00 in the morning. Like, I got nothing for you, man. And I just saw the greed and the stupidity surrounding it. And it's just not me. I can't do it. I almost physically can't do that. And so, I told Kevin one time, I think you have to make a decision, Kev. We're going to be friends, or money will get in the way. And Kevin thought the same thing, let's be more friends than we ever would be, So money never got in the way for me. And then we went to do Tundra, and I think we did something pretty special, even though it failed pretty spectacularly. Yeah. And from there, I became an editor-in-chief of a couple of companies. And then I wanted to, and I remember talking to Alan Moore. I was lucky. I was like Alan Moore's editor at one point. I was Neil Gaiman's editor. And I talked to him about writing, and I found that a lot of the thoughts that he had about writing were things that I felt about writing too. And I think in the early 90s, you have to remember that the product wasn't really that great. The comic product internally, it was like selling like gangbusters, but it wasn't much of substance. And here was Alan, who had everything of substance. He's a brilliant guy and very nice to me, like super nice to a young kid that just starting out. And I used to talk with him and about ideas and writing and what he was doing. And then, I sat with him in his house, and I told him, I think, when you talk about this, I feel like I could do this, Alan. And I said, should I give it a shot? He said, I don't know, why not, Paul? And so I went down to San Diego and I got Hellblazer.
Wow. If we stop this conversation right there, that's amazing. That's fantastic. But you went on from there to really Marvel was coming out of their bankruptcy and all the woes that they had. And you got involved with the whole Marvel Knights line. And helping to essentially bring Marvel back up out of the dust. How did that go down? How did you end up over there in that mix?
Well, this contains this anecdote, one of many, contains a bit that probably upsets comic fans. I warn you in advance. The comic nerds may find this upsetting.
As a comic nerd, I steel myself for this.
Steel yourself against the evil of Paul Jenkins.
I do have a bone to pick with you, but I'll get to it later.
You can get to your bone. Yeah, that's okay. Everyone's got a bone to pick with me at some point. It's just, so the really what it was is that, now I'd written Hellblazer and I was lucky, right? How lucky was I to get that job, and how lucky was I that Sean Phillips was my artist, right? Like,
it was a match made in heaven.
Yeah. Man, I was so lucky. He was so brilliant. He taught me so much in my first 2 or 3 comics, and I saw what he did to my scripts and went, okay, got it. Now I could write better scripts for him and understand what he would do. And one of the things that really taught me something was like not overwriting. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I wrote this whole thing about the English Civil War, and I really cared. I love this story. It was very meaningful to me, that story too.
I'm in the middle of the English Civil War right now in the History of England podcast.
Oh, okay.
Which I don't know if you ever listened to David Crowther in the History of England podcast, but he's absolutely brilliant. And it's phenomenal. But I'm in 1643 right now. I'm in the middle of it.
So the story was, and this is something, so, all right, got it. So unfortunately, the week that I found out I had Hellblazer, and one of my best friends was killed in a car crash, and he died instantly, and it was impossible to reconcile. Like, what, right? Like, what am I supposed to do with this information? And so I was given 2 stories that they wanted me to write in Australia, and I did my best. But the first one that I really wrote that was mine was called Riding the Green Lanes. And so what you have to understand about Britain, remember, I grew up on a Roman road. Like, I know where all the green lanes are. Like my brother and I can just point at them and go, that's a green lane right there. You can see it. You just, the way it's constructed and where it is. And the story was basically that John, as a young punk, had gone to a famous Civil War battle that was so violent that after the battle ended, they told stories that the battle was replayed in the sky. There were more people that died in that battle than even died in the first day of the Somme offensive. So that's how bad it was. And they didn't have guns. Mostly they had clubs and sticks. And so it's a very, very awful thing. And the psychic residue apparently was so bad that it was replayed in the sky. And John and Dean, who was my friend, go to go see some punk music where they go out, and Dean's never seen again. He goes out the forest, and what happens is he gets trapped in the battle. And so many years later, John comes and he finds him again. And it meant so much to write that story, and it was all about me and my friend. And I remember at the funeral, I remember being able to, the funeral was really hard, but I remember being able to go back to his mum and give her a copy of that book and some of the original pages for it. And I left a copy what happened was I gave her some original pages, and I left a copy myself at his grave. And I guess she found the copy that I'd left, and was very moved by it, and sort of won't let it go even to this day, like framed and all of that. But it was a story about him, and so it kept him alive in some ways. And in that moment, I found out the power of being a writer was that I could tell a story, and that's where I learned. I cut my teeth on the first few issues of Hellblazer and went, okay, I think I've got a lot to say. And I didn't realize how much I had to say about life. But then I looked back, and so here's the unpopular bit, right? It was a really long-winded thing, but here's the unpopular bit. The problem is, or maybe the benefit to me, was that I don't read a lot of comics. In fact, I wasn't a person that knew much about comics. And it upsets fans that I'm not a massive comic book reader. Not that I don't read them at all. I have plenty that I really like, right? But I'm very discerning about what I would read, like the Sandman books and things like that. Things that mean something to me. Enemy Ace War Idol by George Pratt. These beautiful older books. I just love this kind of book. And so when I got this phone call from Jay Lee, we had been talking about working together, and Jay said, Joe and Jimmy from Event Comics have got a gig over at Marvel. And we were like, what, those two? You're kidding me, right? But we knew them, they were good guys. And he said, yeah, they want me to come work on a project, right? And they asked me who I want to work with, and I said, yeah, I'd love to work with Paul. And so, what do you think about working with Marvel? I said, that sounds good. And he said, well, we're going to do the Inhumans. And I said, that sounds great. Who are they? Because I'd never heard of them. And I know it's upsetting, and I'm sorry.
That doesn't bother me at all.
Well, the benefit was that I hadn't read loads of Inhumans comics, so I didn't have anything that would spoil my ideas or influence them. I could just look at the 2 little comics they sent me and then go, okay, I can use that, right? And so I did. I got a couple of Jack Kirby comic books that were 5 pages long. And then I called him up and went, I don't need any more. I think I've got my idea. I wrote a 12-issue series, and it won an Eisner Award, and they hadn't won one for a really long time. And they basically said to me, all right, what do you want to write? You can do anything. You want Spider-Man, Avengers, and things I didn't really know Spider-Man, the Avengers. I kind of knew Spider-Man, but And I said, no, I want to do the Sentry. And they're like, not because I had pitched a Sentry to them for years, and they turned it down. So they let Jay and I get on the Sentry, and then they liked that. And as you can see now, obviously it's a big thing.
I have to tell you, as a comic fan, actually I owned a comic book store at the time, and still in the same store. But I remember when all the things with the Sentry were happening, and all of this like found footage kind of stuff of all these things. Whose idea was that?
The marketing idea, I think, was Joe Quesada's. Yeah, because
that was simultaneously one of my favorite things that I have ever seen in a comic, and also one of the most frustrating things I've ever encountered in a comic. But it was absolutely brilliant. It was so well executed.
Can you describe it since you own the store? Describe it to everybody so that they can hear what we did.
Correct me at any points where I'm wrong, but there starts to be this news put around that starts transitioning out into the comic book circles and all these things, that Marvel had been doing some digging back in their archives and things, and had found this character that was a Superman-like character who predated even the Fantastic Four, which is really the beginning of the Silver Age for Marvel. But they only found bits and pieces, and nobody could remember him. They're like, who is this guy? And so the story that circulated was that with these, they wanted to bring this character back from the dust of history, but they didn't have complete stories. And so they merged it, old found footage with new footage, the stuff that you and Jay were doing. And even went so far as to hire some of the old school artists back in the day, like John Romita Sr. and these guys. So you have these pages that look straight out of a comic book from 1960, 1961. And then you've got them side by side with pages and panels that are these cutting edge new things by Jay Lee, where he's got a very unique style, and still one of my favorites to this day. So you've got this story that is this lost character that has been refound, and all these things coming together. And it turns out it was never a lost character; it was just in your head.
So I can tell you the pieces that it was something that I created, and I can tell you the pieces that I was responsible for. So early, before you even saw that marketing campaign, we actually had Wizard magazine, the old Wizard magazine, print an obituary for a guy called Artie Rosen, who was survived by his lovely wife Blanche Rosen. And so they literally went ahead.
Were they in on it, or
they were in on it?
Oh, that's fantastic.
I think they were in on it. And we had Stan write this whole thing about I remember finding these, but I can't remember doing it. I remember Artie, he was a lovely guy. So we printed a picture in the obituary, and it was Joe's wife, Nancy. It was her dad. No, it was her granddad, right? In his Navy uniform. And we said he was Artie Rosen. Now, the name was mine. It came from because comic letterers never get their due in some ways. And so back in the day, you had Joe Rosen and Artie Simek. And so I mixed the names, and it was Artie Rosen. And that's where the name came from.
Oh, that's fantastic.
And then we put this whole thing out. And the best part was that now they're like, okay, Paul, we're fully in, we're fully committed. We're bringing this new character out. And it really was, I was very proud of that book. But I had to do this press junkets with Joe. And so Joe's really good at lying. And I'm terrible. My wife knows how horrible I am. So if I start lying, right, my face goes red, and I just, she's like, you're lying. And I'm like, yeah, I know. So I used to have to sit at these things where I'd sit there and they go, Paul, how did it feel to find Stan Lee's lost creation with Artie Rosen? And I'd go, oh yeah, it was. And Joe would shut me up and then start talking.
And you're just turned all shades of red. Oh,
and I'm just
Joe
terrible.
Quesada can stand up and go off about any topic at any time to anybody.
And so I was totally terrible at it. And he just used to say, just shut up. Don't say anything. You're going to give the game away. So we got through it, and it came out, and that marketing campaign and that book, I think is very special. And there's been a lot of talk about how that thing got created. So I've always thought it's a good idea to clarify how it got created, right? It came from the fact that I wanted to work. Once I got Hellblazer, I talked to Karen Berger, the editor of Vertigo, and I said, I'd like to do this book I've created called The Sentry. I think it's really good. Well, actually, no, I didn't. I'm sorry. I'd like to do Our Man, because I thought Our Man was a fantastic character. And I said, can I bring Our Man into Vertigo? Because the idea that somebody would have a pill that lasts an hour that makes them a superhero, to me, sounds like an amazing story to tell about addiction, right?
Yep.
If I had that pill, I would be just counting the hours away until a day had gone by so I could take it. And that would be the story of somebody that couldn't get past this need. Yeah. And
I would love to read that story. And why in the world they wouldn't bring Our Man into Vertigo, because they weren't using him anywhere else.
Yeah, they weren't. But what Karen said to me was that they weren't touching superheroes. And I thought it was a shame, because you'd done Sandman had been there, and, Shade the Changing Man. It didn't look like he couldn't do it. And I thought that take was really good, right?
I mean, they brought Swamp Thing over.
Yeah. So I thought it could be done, but, they didn't want to do it. And so she said, look, why don't you do this? Like, that's a great story, a story of someone that maybe is addicted to their own power, maybe, this. And so I created the Sentry, and then I pitched it back to her. She said, well, not for us, because it's got superheroes in it. I pitched it to Marvel proper. I pitched it to DC, and they turned it down repeatedly, even when I got to do Hellblazer, and they just always turned it down. And I really wanted to revisit it. And so when we won an Eisner for the Inhumans, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to do the Sentry book that I keep pitching at you. And they're like, oh, not that stupid thing.
Dang it. Oh, we fell for that. We walked into this trap.
Because I'm the only guy stupid enough that when they first asked me to do Spider-Man, I was like, no, I don't get it. I don't want to do it. And they were like, how do you say no? What do you want to do? You can do the Avengers if you like.
Spider-Man, but I have to say, Sentry was one of those characters that I think the marketing campaign and the way that all went about probably helped. I think that was a pretty darn clever move.
It was a clever move.
As you go into the story and you start digging into it, and then you get to the twist, right? Because there's a heck of a twist.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the edge of my seat, man. I got to tell you, that whole time, I'm just like, what's happening? I was dying for the next issue, and love that series.
There are some things that have come out of my work, that I can look back on and say, yeah, I really liked a certain thing. Like it's you have your own work and you see it quite regularly, and sometimes you're excited about what you've done. Usually, I think when my stuff gets printed, I don't look at it for like 2 or 3 years. I barely look at it when it's done. I remember that I called Bill Sienkiewicz. I was talking with him, and he hadn't been doing any comics, and he wanted
he's a genius, isn't he?
Yeah, Bill's a genius. I used to be his editor with him and Alan Moore on Big Numbers, so I'd known him for a long time. And
I've been trying to get him to come on the show for years.
Yeah, he's a good guy. Bill's a great guy.
He is one of my all-time idols as far as comic book creators goes. I love that guy.
Yeah, and he hadn't done a comic in a really long time, and he didn't really want to do them. And I said, like, come on, Bill, I got this. And he said, I'll tell you what. He said, would you be able to do it with 2 panel pages? And I said, the answer is yes. What's the question? And he went, great. And I said, okay, let's do it. I'll do it like that then. So I did it, the whole thing with 2 panel pages, so that Bill could take the space that he wanted to draw and get himself back into like a sequential narrative without having to necessarily do the perspectives and all of the characters looking at a different panel and moving your eye across the page and everything. He wanted to get back into it, but he needed to do it that way, I think, and it was beautiful.
Okay, I never knew the background behind it. I just thought it was a cool experimental thing you were doing. I didn't realize that you were saying, if that's the way that you will do this, then I will write that.
So I made something great, right? I think I made something great because guess what? Bill Sienkiewicz drew a full issue of it. And why I loved that story so much was because what we did with the Hulk was something that really hadn't been done. He sees the Sentry, and he's really in the forest by himself or something. And he's just ready to kill everybody. He's the Hulk. And the Sentry shows up, and all of a sudden the Hulk is like a little puppy. And he goes, Golden Man. And he runs up to the Sentry. He's like, Golden Man, where you been? And he's like this really loyal, lovable sidekick kind of character. And it turns out that the Sentry, when the Sentry is around him, that no one knows that the Hulk is angry and difficult because his skin hurts. So his entire body hurts, his skin hurts. And when the Sentry's around, it soothes the skin and it makes him feel okay. But no one had ever bothered to ask him if he was in pain. And so it's this really poignant, sad little thing about like the Hulk was like this little puppy, and he's like, go. And then when they face off against the Void at the end, you know, and Hulk is genuinely scared, which is just not the Hulk, right? And he's
you
like,
don't see that,
you know,
right?
I'm afraid. But he says the greatest thing. He kind of goes like, Hulk is the bravest one there is. Hulk is brave, you know, and he's like trying to G himself up, and it's just like this. It's such a great way to like be able to write that character. So, you know.
That was brilliant. But yeah, loved the Sentry. I thought it was great. So I love that. That's how you got to that, and that you parlayed that success with the Inhumans into the Sentry, which is great. So not too long after that, I guess, somewhere in that general vicinity. Anyway, this is where my bone to pick with you comes in.
Come on.
You wrote G.I. Joe Reloaded, Cobra Reborn.
Yes, I did.
I'm a huge G.I. Joe fan. You might have noticed.
Okay, I get it.
And I had never wanted it before that moment. But after reading that, I wanted an ongoing series of that guy.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time Cobra Commander ever made sense to me.
Yep.
It was terrifying. It was absolutely, utterly terrifying because I found myself saying, this guy genuinely believes he's a patriot.
Yep. Look at what's happened. Look at what's happened in this country. In some ways, you know, you can see
it's very prophetic and it's horrifying.
Yep. Yeah.
But my God, that was such a great and brilliant. It's the only issue of G.I. Joe that about Cobra Commander particularly, but it's the only issue of G.I. Joe outside of the stuff that Larry Hama has done and some of the stuff Josh Blaylock has done that just has stuck with me. And that one issue, because that man believed so forcibly in that he was right, and you finally got to see it, and it wasn't just some guy running around like, Cobra, I'm doing an evil plot today. You believed this guy.
Yep.
And oh my God. And so my bone is, where's the rest? I needed to see more of that.
Well, the thing about how to write a villain, especially when you write them as like mustachio twirling villains that stand up like in an old Laurel and Hardy movie, then they're just a joke, right? They're not a thing. What you have to do with somebody like Cobra Commander is what I did was I agree with Cobra Commander. I agreed with him, what he said, right? He was a car salesman. He was a nobody, he said. He was a nobody that, you know, when his wife left him and the government came up to him for back taxes and he had been cleaned out by his own government for back taxes on where the divorce had not worked out for him. In other words, you know, he had a successful business and here came the government to take away his business and to mess him up, and he didn't do anything wrong, right? And his feeling was, you know, this was taxation without representation. Now, if you go and take a look at the history of the United States, you know, the whole point of the formation of the United States was because of taxation without representation, which, by the way, just so that you know, like British people, we actually get taught real
history.
Like you guys get taught like romantic history in America about your own history. But
that's sadly true.
So I knew about the real history of the formation of the United States, and I've written it in Captain America. And, you know, one of the things about the Tea Party, a little general knowledge quiz for you. You ready? Why did they throw the tea into the harbor? What were they protesting?
Well, I was always taught the tax issue.
But which specific tax issue were they protesting?
That they were getting taxed on something.
Well,
I do know this.
Anyway, it's okay. Sorry to put you on the spot, but here's what was really going on, right? The people who were the founding fathers, right, were literally the people that owned most of the business in the tea trade at that point anyway. And what happened in that particular thing was that they weren't protesting the raising of taxes. They were protesting the lowering of taxes on tea, right? But they were protesting that someone else would set the margins for the tea taxation. But, you know, those Sons of Liberty were all in the tea trade. They were all in on that stuff anyways. It's not like, you know, it's a really interesting story. And so, you know, when you look at it like that, you know, and you see the real thing, you see Cobra Commander's argument that, you know, this country was formed because people were being taxed and they weren't represented in the way they were taxed, right? And now here I am just trying to be a businessman and I'm not represented, and this is wrong. Let's stop this. And so he incites. So you agree with him, right? And that's what's scary.
Yeah, and that was what was scary. Yes.
Right. But you don't agree with his methods, and that's the best way to use a villain, right? I agree with him. I just don't agree with his methods, which is killing people, you know?
Yeah. Oh my God. It was such a powerful issue. And I had never seen Cobra Commander in that light before. And I've always looked at him through that lens since.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it was great. I just wanted to see more, because now that's a compelling villain to me, and not just the twirling mustache. He became very compelling. And so I have a bone to pick with you because I didn't get enough. I needed more of that.
If they ask me back, I'll go do it, but they'd have to let me write it that way, right? Which they often don't. You know, they just, you know, I was given at least the freedom to write a good story.
It was absolutely one of my all-time favorite G.I. Joe issues of any kind ever, and I've got them all.
You know, I'd be surprised to hear. To me, that is one that was very surprising. You have a career, you do lots of different things, and that particular issue is a very surprising one for the amount of people that have come up to me and said, "This is Cobra Commander. This is canon. Apparently, it's canon. The story that we told is what they use now." And this is Cobra Commander, right? Like, and you're like, that was a one book, you know, that I wrote one time, but you know, that one here, I guess.
Well, you took a character that had been around for a long time, but had always, like, how did he come to lead this massive paramilitary organization? Mm-hmm. Who would follow this guy? He's a coward. He's an idiot. How? This makes no sense. Right. You can tell this is based on a toy, right? And then you took him and turned him into that's why people follow him. I'm darn ready to pick up, you know, my pitchfork and my torch and follow him too.
Yep, that's the trick. That's how to write the villains, and you get lost in what you're doing, but you agree with him. He's right. You know, you should be represented, and you know, and I see this in the legal and judicial system. Sometimes I see it in taxation. You know, like, do you think that, you know, are we in a place even now, right? You know, I come from a generation of sort of punk, and so we don't do politics much. And you know, do you think you live in a place where you're represented? Well, how could you be if districts are gerrymandered as badly as they are? You know, you're not represented because politicians pick the people voting for them. You know, all of this has always been true. So Cobra Commander is right. That's the scary part, you know?
Yes, it absolutely was. But I thought it was brilliant. Somewhere in this time frame too was when I started, and I don't know if this is accurate. You'll have to correct me here, but this is about the time when I started my collection of what may be the most extensive art collection of Paul Jenkins art. I don't know if you remember this.
Did you come up to me at conventions and ask me for sketches? Were you one of those people? Because that happened.
Oh, I did. I certainly did. I may have been the first.
You might have been. Depends what I drew for you.
Because I came up to you. This was at a convention in Atlanta.
Yeah.
I came up to you and I asked you, because I had decided this was a fun thing to do to get writers to draw things.
Yeah.
And I asked you to draw something, and you said, "No, dude, I'm an artist. I'm a writer. I'm not an artist." And I said, "Well, Mark Waid's not an artist either, but he just drew something for me, and I think you could destroy Mark Waid."
And I could. Yeah, I could take Mark Waid in a second. Yeah, absolutely.
So here's what Mark Waid drew.
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
And down there, the asterisk, not an artist, right?
Yeah. Okay,
so
good.
This is what I used to entice you to draw something for me.
Right. Okay.
And this is what you drew.
Must destroy Mark Waid and all he stands for. True enough. Yep. Got to take him out.
So absolutely brilliant, right? So a year or two later, I come to another show, and I come up and I say, "Can I get you to draw something?" You said, "Sure. What do you want?" And I said, "I don't know, Spider-Man." So this is what you drew.
Look at that's about it. I got it. Yep.
Okay. So the next time I saw you, I said, "Can you draw something?" You said, "Yes." And you took the pad and you started doing this number, like, and you wouldn't let me see what it was. And I was trying to figure it out because it looked like you were drawing 3 tombstones,
right,
and a cactus.
Okay.
And one of the tombstones was
Can I
like
make a guess?
dotted lines.
I almost remember this.
What in the world?
I'm going to guess I know what. Yeah, it's it's the Fantastic Four.
I'm telling you, this right here is one of my all-time favorite con sketches by anybody.
It's the lady you can hardly see on the right, which is great.
Yeah.
Mr. Stretchy, you know, the Thing, he's like rock guy. And then what makes that is the Jack Kirby heat lines on the Human Torch.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then a year or two later, I saw you at another show, and these are all spaced out of like 10 years, right?
Right.
I saw you at another show, and I walked up to you, and you're like, dude. And you said, I'll draw you, but this is the last one.
Okay.
Stop asking me to draw things.
Yeah. Obviously, being of Welsh descent, I'm somewhat half decent at sheep. And so, yeah, I could do that. You please send those to me. I need a picture of each of those because those are good. Yeah, I'll put them up on my socials as this was my brief fling and in 10 years, Josh, I didn't improve, did I? I got worse.
I don't know. That sheep is pretty good. That sheep is pretty good.
Yeah.
Very clearly a sheep.
Yeah.
I think during this phase, you might have been watching some, or not, that's not you. You might have been watching some, oh God, what are they called? South Park.
Yeah. It's basically this is all I've got. You know, must destroy Mark Waid and all he stands for. Actually, I gotta be honest. I think that my Spider-Man image is pretty good because you're not to know that he's not there.
Yeah. I did love. You said, "What do you want me to do?" I said, "Spider-Man," and you're like, "Okay, cool." That cracked me up. I loved it.
I think that the great part about it is, as a storyteller, that little picture tells a story because off panel you can hear thwip, and then you can hear Spider-Man go, "Ow!" Like he's not great today at being Spider-Man. He probably like landed on a wall or something, twisted his ankle.
Absolutely, but this one right here, this Fantastic Four, I love trying to describe this to people.
Yeah,
because they're like, "What in the world?" Because I'm watching you draw it, and it took me a minute to figure out where you were going. I'm like, I do not know what he is drawing. I really don't.
It's definitely the heat lines on the Human Torch that really sell that piece, And you go on about all you people, you go on about Bill Sienkiewicz this, and George Pratt that, and Sean Phillips this, and it's like, look at what I did.
That is art.
Now let me tell you what I do with artists at shows, right? I do a head sketch and they do a head sketch. Mine takes me about 12 seconds. Theirs takes them about 3 minutes. And I'm like, I'm a better artist than you are because they're just as happy with my head sketch, right? And it took me 12 seconds. If you could just do it like I do it, you'd be better.
You're vastly more efficient.
I remember doing one of those where I had a mashup with Jay Lee, whose art is so beautiful. And I just drew my head sketch. And then he was saying to Jay's head sketch, he was saying, do better.
Sheep would have suspenders.
That's right.
I tell you though, on this one of my favorite bits here is if you look on Mr. Fantastic, his eyes are way up over the Human Torch, and then his mouth is way down here.
That's right. Yeah.
So he's stretched mid-head.
Oh, yeah. 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 Mr. Stretchy. That's what he does.
But yes, this is, like I said, I don't know that it's the most extensive collection of Paul Jenkins art, but it might be.
Let me tell you this, right? I guarantee it's the most extensive selection because everyone else threw theirs away, mate. You're the only one that kept it.
Oh, I still have them. As a matter of fact, that first show where I got you to draw that first one, I don't know if you remember this. I would wager you. I don't know why you would, but you had been sitting at that table a long time, and one of the guys who worked for my shop, Ultimate Josh, because I'm Josh, and so he was the new one, so Ultimate Spider-Man was
Ultimate
out.
Josh, right?
So he was Ultimate Josh.
Good.
He still goes by that, by the way. And now people just call him UJ, and nobody knows why. Just this handful of us that know why. And that's amusing. But he came up to you with a box full of Krispy Kreme donuts, and you sang a jingle about Krispy Kreme donuts. That was absolutely hysterical.
Great.
And so when I told my friend Damon, who he works like crazy hours, so he's going to have to watch this later. But when I told him that you were coming on the show, he says, ask him if he remembers the Krispy Kreme jingle. That's what I say. I guarantee you he does not.
You know, at what stage of inebriation was I in, really? You know, is the question. You know, like I don't remember it. I don't remember the Krispy Kreme jingle. But you know, the chances of me actually knowing a Krispy Kreme jingle was zero. So it would have been something that I made up on the spot.
Oh, it was you very clearly made it up on the spot, and that's what made it so funny, because it was very funny.
Good.
I don't remember what it was. I just remember how it made me feel, and it cracked me up.
Well, you know, one of the things that I say to people a lot, you know, creators, like we are not trained for, you know, we're not trained to do public relations or any of that stuff. But, you know, some of us, I've always like loved meeting the fans, and, you know, like kind of, I think there's certain things in it that are so rewarding. There's things that are so rewarding for me as a creator, and the biggest thing for me is meeting. I do have a guitar right there, by the way, Brandon. It's like literally over there, but I'm not playing the Krispy Kreme jingle.
You could make one up right now.
I found that when you play a guitar through these microphones, when you're trying to like broadcast, half the time you can't hear the strings at all. You can't hear it. I don't know what it's something to do with the frequency.
I believe that.
Yeah, it is. It's something to do with the frequency. But so, you know, I was saying that I feel lucky to do my job, and I love meeting fans, and I'm just like a carnival barker. Hey, what's up? You know, like talking to everybody like Jack the Lad, right? And other creators have a bit more of a struggle with it. It's difficult, right? Like it's, you know, you may be a bit awkward socially, or not necessarily feel like you're that ready for it. So usually what I try to remember, you know, and I remember it for a very, very good personal reason, you know, but I try to remember that perhaps meeting me or any of my friends who are creators, for us, it might be a moment, but for the person meeting us, it might be really, really, really big. And that applies to every single person that you meet and every interaction that you have, even if someone's like, sometimes people come up and they're kind of weird or mean, you know, sometimes, right? And it doesn't matter. Just like do the same thing and welcome everybody, make them feel happy, and give them something to remember by, especially if it's a Krispy Kreme jingle. So.
Well, a Krispy Kreme jingle goes a long way.
Yeah.
Not as far as, you know, about 4 dozen donuts. Those will put you right into a coma. But the jingles are great. But you just said something I thought was dead on the nose. My friend Scott Oden is a writer. He's a phenomenal writer of books, not comics, but really, really great. He is not a people person. Mm-hmm. And it's got to be extremely difficult for people who the very nature of writing itself is often very solitary. So you're doing this thing in your garret or, you know, in your office or down in the basement or wherever it is that you work. And then you have to trot it out in front of people, and then you have to like schmooze people and sell people. It's just an entirely different skill set.
Yep.
So it can be very, very difficult. And for him, it is very challenging. He's like, what am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to tell people this? And I'm like, that's why you have people like me, who I will go out and pimp your book to whoever I think would like it.
Yeah.
That's part of my job as a store owner, is to say, what do you like? Let me put something you are going to like in your hands. Because if they find something they like, they're going to want more. And that's how we get these incredible stories, and you support the people who create these things, because otherwise we just have blank walls to stare at and nothing but newspapers to read. And that's a sad world.
Yeah.
And I guess that's as good a transition as any, because your career has involved not just comics, but also movies and music and video games and all kinds of mediums. So it's not the medium, it's the stories, right? You're a storyteller.
Yeah, I'm working with somebody tonight. I'm working with some musicians right now. You know, I have spoken at a number of futurism conventions about the future of story. In part, the reason they get an idiot like me to show up is because, you know, when they're looking for someone that does what was called for the longest time transmedia, and if you say transmedia at me, I probably won't be as affable. I'll come over the table at you, because people that say it don't do it. They don't get it. They don't mean it, right? What you need is a piece of intellectual property that is intentionally designed to be a comic book and can spoke out over here to be a film, but this is the video game version of it, and this is how it ties in, you know, and here's the music component. And so you just need it all connected. And that doesn't get connected just because the IP exists, right? And so I have been a creator advocate my entire life. I was lucky enough to start with Tundra and Ninja Turtles, so we had done the Creators Bill of Rights. And so my true strong belief is that creators are the fundamental hub. When you got that hub with all the things that spoke around it, it's not the story that's at the hub, it's the creator at the hub. Mm-hmm. If the creator can move across different media to make the stuff even better, right, which is something that I've been able to do. And so, you know, in talking about story that way, we are we're seeing the benefits of it now, right? Like what happens, you know, I remember giving a lecture. I worked at a film studio for a while in Norcross in Georgia, and we had a bunch of kids in one day, and I said, hands up who knows a movie that's been made out of a video game. A video game that's been made out of a movie. And the kids put their hand up, and I said, no, a good one. And they all put their hands down. Mm-hmm. Because there were no great video games or films, because the moment they greenlight a film, they greenlight the video game, and then they try to get the developer to develop it in a completely different cycle. They never build the thing the way they're supposed to, right? And so, you know, I've been an advocate for storytelling like that. I've been an advocate really especially for creators, because creators, no IP, no idea exists, no Sentry, no Wolverine, no Spider-Man. And so if you look at the history of Spider-Man, you know, Steve Ditko was very, very upset about how that came about. And I don't blame him. No. Jack Kirby, you know, created almost everything you see in his Marvel films. He created it, right? But he wasn't, you know, he wasn't able to do much about it in his lifetime. Now, I knew Dick Cook, who used to be the chairman of Disney, and he bought some of Jack Kirby's library afterwards. And I worked with with Dick on some of that stuff. And what's really sad is that Jack got himself a job at Ruby Spears, the people that I think made HR Puff and stuff, right? You know, mm-hmm. And these old, you know, puppet shows and stuff. And he would go in and he would draw a little bit of stuff in the day, and then he'd brown bag his lunch, and his wife Roz would come in, and then she'd have something to eat with him at lunch, and then he'd draw a bit more and go home. And they did it for Jack because he didn't have health insurance, and they felt sorry for him because he's a genius. He's an amazing person. And we need to look at that, right?
That's so wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong. And we need to look at that. And he never got his benefit in his lifetime. No. He didn't get benefit from it, you know, and Roz passed away and the children got old. And then there was the morning of the Supreme Court hearing. And at that moment, they settled out of court. Sure. But, you know, where had Jack gone with all of that, right? He hadn't got to where he needed to be. And that's not fair, and it's not right. And so, you know, we need to have more understanding and perhaps reverence for people that create our materials. Also teachers, you know, also people that deserve it, right? And a little bit less reverence for people like politicians, right? What do you need that for? Like what we might want to look at in our world, I believe, because this is the nature of creativity. In creativity, nothing is certain, a little bit like science, right? It's not certain. You're doing the best you can. In the world of politics, and this is why I think it's very sad that people get so angry about politics, is you're saying, I'm right, I am correct. Well, no one's correct. You tell me that this is how it is, that's never how it is, right? And so I think that what creative people do is they build the understanding of the world by thinking of ideas. And you know, creative people don't come up with all the answers. We raise the questions, and that's fantastic. That's what people should do. Never say that you know everything, because you're wrong immediately the moment you say that, right? And so I'm hopeful that what really will happen as we continue into the world of AI, I think AI, the genie is out of the bottle. I think that we're going to be using AI. It's just what's part of the world. But what we need to have is understanding of whose shoulders are we riding on. And if someone puts Bill Sienkiewicz in a search term in an art thing, right, then Bill should get some money for that, you know. And
yeah, I saw something the other day, clearly not generated by AI. You see an artist, it's somebody fishing, and they've got their line in the water, right?
Mhm.
And then behind them, somebody else is sitting there with their line in that first guy's bucket of his fish that he's already caught.
Yeah.
And it said artist AI,
Yeah.
right? And that's so dead on.
It's dead on in a way, but it's a little simplistic in the sense that AI does lots of things, right? Like
Sure.
I embrace new technologies because I write across all media, including especially new technologies and the advent of new technologies, right? And it's why I get to all these futurism conventions because actually quite often, like I said, an idiot like me is actually quite often correct about what's happening and where it will go. You know, here's a good one, you know, that people don't understand. For example, people look at NFTs and they quite rightly turn their nose up and go, what was that all about? But let's take a look at what an NFT is. It's a non-fungible token that basically allows for digital interactive entertainment. It's actually just a piece of technology, right? And it is a piece of technology that you're going to be using in 10 years' time anyway, like it or not. It's not, but what it shouldn't be was what they did with it, which is to turn them into glorified JPEGs that sell for loads of money. There's no value in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it was a sales hustle, basically. But if you look at the fundamental technology, it's amazing, right? You can. So I was explaining this the other day to somebody. You know, let's say that you were a baseball card collector. If you have a digital baseball card, great, right? Same as a paper one. If you're happy with a digital one, great. But what if that card updates the stats every night and gives you a little bit of video on what your favorite player just did and does new things? It gives you information that changes all the time. That's pretty cool, right?
That would be cool. Yes.
And that's an NFT. An NFT can do that. And it can be a collectible that has a certain thing. It can update itself. It can do all kinds of really cool stuff, right? You know, and as long as it's a mutable object, right? And so there are ways for those technologies to work, and there are ways for, you know, that these things will all be done. And so AI is a thing. AI is a tool like a hammer. But will it ever? Do you think an AI is going to write a novel, a screenplay, or a comic book that is going to ever mean anything? Never. I mean, they'll try, but this is how I explain it in my college lecture, if I may, right? It's pretty simple.
Oh yeah, go for it.
British comedy is a little bit, I think, a bit above American comedy generally, because Americans like to explain the joke, whereas British comedy, it's like situational humor and something, and then you wonder what they might do next as you cut to a different scene, right?
And you get this a lot.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. It's just a look and then you cut, right?
Yeah.
And you know what might happen next. And so I think that an AI, a machine, doesn't have the understanding of human intuition and motion to write a scene where two people like see something and the scene ends with we understand the context of a funny thing they just saw and they just like look at each other and we cut. The machine doesn't understand that. It doesn't know what to do with that kind of thing. So these machines are not going to replace us, but I think it's a shame that if they're being built on the back of artists, that they're not paying the artists for how they're being built on the back of these artists.
Yes, I 100% agree.
Yeah.
But that comes down to creator rights, as you said.
Yeah.
And I guess that leads us to, you've had a long history with creator rights. You talked about the Creators Bill of Rights, which was pretty groundbreaking at the time. It's like, how could they possibly need this? This makes no sense. And then you see guys, creators like William Messner Loebs, for example, who is living such a difficult life right now, has been for the past several years, brought us so many wonderful things in comics, and living out of his car and things like that, finally gets into a place, but then it's falling apart and can't pay bills because there's nothing there that pays him for the work that he did. And so what's he supposed to do now? It's horrifying. So you fought for this, and you fought those Creator Bill of Rights, and you've always kind of been an advocate for creators, and you've been on the side of creators, which I've always admired. But that kind of carries over to today, and one of the reasons that we wanted to bring you on the show was to talk to folks and let more folks know about it, because you're kind of in a situation now that is a kind of a challenge again, where somebody is they're targeting creators, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think creators are being targeted. I wouldn't say it's just this one person, but yes,
right, sure.
This is
certainly just one example.
One example, yeah. I had a conversation with a well-known creator recently who has been sued twice in the last 3 years. First one cost him 150 grand, and the lawsuit was crazy. The lawsuit was basically an accusation of something that he did, because in America, it's much cheaper to sue somebody than to be sued.
Yes.
There's a reason why, right? If you don't respond to the lawsuit, then you get a default judgment against you. So that's no good, right? You have to respond. And that lawsuit that this friend of mine had dealt with was just completely without merit. And then once he dealt with that lawsuit and won, but what do you win? You don't win anything. You just spend lots of money to defend yourself for no good reason. And then he got sued again by somebody who he did a publishing endeavor with. And, the publishing endeavor didn't sell a lot. And so the guy sued him in 4 separate states, which is literally, you are not allowed to do. It's weaponizing the law against somebody, like using the incorrect jurisdiction. And so, we as creators, for some reason, like there's this new thought, why don't we attack these people because we can't do what they do, right? First thing I would say is that's not true. You can do what I can do, right? You just have to learn it, believe it, think about it. There's no such thing as talent. Talent is just potential, but you have to add a work ethic, and you have to add like a certain amount of like social maturity in a sense. And that's when you've got talent, right? And I see so many people that aren't prepared to do the work. Like, you might think it's great because I come up with a screenplay. Yeah. Well, you weren't there with me for like 17 days in a row at 5 o'clock in the morning as I just went up and down through the screenplay to try to get it to be right before I released it into the world. And if people aren't prepared to do that work, then they can't sort of sit there and point at another creator and say, I hate what you do. I want to sue you for some stupid reason. And I find myself in a situation where, I chaired an advisory committee for the governor of Georgia to help digital interactive and independent filmmaking in Georgia. And I was introduced to a particular person who asked for my help and my production company's help, and we helped. And then we saw this behavior was really, really bad. And it was for this notorious Star Trek fan film called Axanar, which when it was first released, it did a really good short film. But that short film was written and directed and produced by Christian Gossett, who did Red Star, and Jennifer Webley. Like, they did all the work, right? So Prelude to Axanar was great. And it was like a Star Trek kind of fan film, but it looked really amazing.
I remember it, yes.
Right. And so that same guy went great and raised like $1.5 million or so to make Axanar feature film, and never delivered a thing. And so we didn't know this history. We didn't know he'd been sued by CBS. We found out. And then after a certain point, the behavior was so bad. And you're talking about like a sort of a type of toxic fandom that's so bad and so broken and hurts us all. No, they weren't on Trekkies. No, it's so broken that what you do is you see, anger and hatred and screaming and yelling and accusations. If you think about it, and this is something that I've definitely learned how to say, right? The accusation of a narcissist is always a confession, right? You're a liar.
That's 100% true. Yes.
You're a liar, they say, and that's because
they accuse you of what they're guilty of.
They always do. And then if you really, really want to upset a narcissist, you just accuse them of the thing they actually did, and they just go berserk, right? And so I think when you see this type of behavior from people in the fan arena, we saw it and we said, look, we're going to have to leave. And the answer we got was, well, you're not leaving, you're fired. And you're fired because you didn't do any work, and you suck, and you're terrible, and you're awful. And we're like, all right, we won't let the door hit us on the way out. But what the guy did was use my likeness to keep raising money. And we're like, no, we're fired. Like, you need to say, we're gone. We've left this production. We're not part of this production. And he wouldn't stop. And so eventually my company, we released a press release to say, look, we're not part of this thing. And so he sued me. In fact, he sued my company, but he sued me personally, and then basically didn't even pursue the charges against my company. Just when you get the wrong person, they have problems. And I think that someone like myself, who's pretty well known, and people generally like me, because I'm pretty kind natured and an affable guy. When you have that person that sees the attention that someone like I get and the accomplishment that I get, that person has had 3 directors, all of whom are working professionals: Christian Gossett, Rob Burnett, and myself, who I have a 35-year history of like some pretty significant accomplishments in this business. And his contention is that we're all amateurs and we don't know anything. We're all beginners and we're terrible and our careers are going nowhere. Listen, reality is optional when you arrive at a certain point. It throws reality out the window. And so he sued me, and then it took a few months, and he basically said, yeah, give me $310,000. And to me, we're sort of like, well, this escalated quickly, what? But it turns out he was in 5 lawsuits at the same time and would just brag and so it was this, what it essentially is, Josh, I think, is the ability to scream across the internet. Like he would do a live stream every day and yell and be hateful and scream and be dishonest about the things that he contended. And so I ignored it for about 3 years. But what I think everybody should be so frustrated by, people watching this, and what you want to work out is, at a certain point, I realized, oh, this guy knows exactly what he's doing. He weaponizes the law. And here's one thing that I use as a good example, but it's one example of many. So up to this point, I've been billed, north of 650 and possibly north of 700. I haven't been bothered to add it up in the last few weeks. But what happened was that the moment that I was involved with this, a lot of people reached out to me and said, Paul, you got almost like, you got to help us, because this guy's been doing it to everybody for years. He's a vexatious litigant. And so they started sending me evidence of what he had done, and it was not pretty. And I think especially what people should be frustrated at, the example I use is this. He notoriously doesn't give what is called the discovery materials. You're supposed to get the materials of, say, the emails you sent and the things that are relevant, and you send them in, and they're brought into an electronic search engine, and you can search a term like the word Jenkins or Axonar or something, and you can find it. So I provided 167 emails between he and I. He provided 2. I provided 6,700 emails. He provided 52. He didn't send anything in. And so the stuff that we requested, he never sent in, still hasn't sent in. We had to file motion, Then when we filed a motion to compel that discovery, he filed 9 motions. Why should you be upset? Because he passed the bar in North Carolina and he writes his stuff himself. So he has a cheat code. It means that you win a case in this country if you have resources that are better than the other person's resources, not if you're right. And his resources are that it doesn't cost him anything. And I can say it with complete confidence, because in the end, CBS sued him for copyright violations again, because he violated the terms of a settlement agreement, which was for copyright violations. And they sued him and won for $320,000. In that, the arbitration, so it's not even up for debate at this point. The arbitrator said this guy claimed that he'd spent $360,000 on his lawsuit with me, and he tried to sue CBS to get that money back from them, which is about as bonkers crazy as it gets. And when he did so, the arbitrator looked at it and said, well, I can find no evidence that this person has paid a single penny. And in literal quote, because he hasn't. That was the quote of the arbitrator, right? So you've got this situation where someone has weaponized the legal and judicial system, does it for free, and does it against people. And he took me on, and a lot of people came to me and said, if anyone was ever going to stop this guy, Paul, we think it's you. And they started giving me evidence of what he had done. And it was awful what he had done to other people. Bankruptcies, personal bankruptcies, threats of ruining people's businesses, constant public screaming. But it got worse. And what happened recently, what came to light, was that the bank accounts for when he raised $1.5 million from crowdfunding to make his film, those bank accounts are not pretty, because they raise a lot of questions. I'll give you an example. In a month in which he brought in $522,000, he withdrew $475,000. Now, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation, right? but it's incumbent upon him to give that reasonable explanation, don't you think?
That's where the burden of proof lies. Yes,
that's right. Okay, so he's never done that. He's never shown anybody. And so if anybody's ever criticized him or come back and said, "Look, I donated $100 to you. Can you tell me what happened?" He berates them, demeans them. It's all about, defaming people and like basically trying to make sure you discredit them. Any detractor is discredited. So after 3 years of being silent about it, I spoke about it for the first time maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and he went absolutely crazy. His latest, I shouldn't be too amused, but his latest, I think he loses inhibitions when he's falling apart, right? He's never been challenged like this. He's never got close to a court date. His latest contentions are that I was fired from his production for inappropriate behavior towards women. And why that's actually somewhat amusing is that people know me, right? And so it's not fun because that's really working at my reputation. But people know me. And so, when anyone that knows me hears that, they're like, listen, you picked the wrong guy to say, that he would ever behave, because I just have been a very different person my whole life. He made an overt claim that I had sent someone to attack him at a convention. This is just made up, right? It didn't happen. There's no such thing. And so on. Like, I think it's just when someone like this gets cornered, that now it's just say everything, right? Say everything. And I think it's killing him, because in some ways he knows that when he does that to someone of my reputation, it only reflects on him. And now he's made it worse. Now he doesn't know what to do. So now he's doing more things, and it's getting crazier. I mean, it's just the accusations and the screaming and the live streams and all these things. But in the end, I just was like, look, I'm out of money, right? I've tapped out. We've lost our kids. We've lost our kids' college funds. We've lost our savings, all because I met someone. That's it. And what we say is this. It's incorrect to say there are always two sides to every story. It's not true. It's really naive. Sometimes there's a drive-by shooting. Someone just shows up and they're a bad person, right? I believe this is the only evil person I've ever encountered, in my opinion. And if you encounter someone like that, they do exist. You just don't think they do, but they do. And that's what's happening to creators, right? There are people out there that say, I'm going to do that. I'm that person. I want to build myself up, and I'm going to go after that person. So you're seeing creators that are afraid of being sued. You're seeing creators that are being threatened. You're seeing, and this has to stop.
And you mentioned teachers earlier in that conversation, and they're in the same boat as well. Yeah.
Yep. Teachers being sued because, they're just doing their job, right? They're trying to teach your kids. They're doing the best they can. Something didn't happen, and now my little kid couldn't have done anything wrong. So, I'm going to sue you, or I'm going to sue the school board or something. Look, we need to, first of all, we all need to relax, right? And realize that in, say, the world of politics, if you've got someone telling you as a politician that they are right, they're never right, okay? Settle down and think about it. No one is right. Okay, no one is correct about a thing. It's all psychological manipulation. So we need to look at what things we think. What's your stance on a political issue, right? If your stance is lockstep in with a party, whether it's blue or red, right, you need to rethink, because we have our own minds and we're supposed to make that thing up. And so that phenomenon is an interesting one because it's very cultish. And this person has a group of people that do his bidding. I kid you not, in psychological terms, we interviewed a clinical psychologist for the documentary we're making. And she told us that narcissists will have a group of people they call the flying monkeys. Mm-hmm. And it's like the witch sends out the flying monkeys to do their bidding, and they'll do their bidding. And largely they'll do the bidding because they're afraid. They're afraid that they'll get in that person's eye if they don't do all these things. And so, we set up the GoFundMe because I need to get him. The trick is to get him in a courtroom, because he's never, ever, ever been in a courtroom before. He's been hit with slap violations for suing people in the wrong jurisdiction, but he's never paid a penny for it. And so what he needs to do is to stand in front of a judge and a jury with all of the evidence that we've accrued, and then explain to a judge and jury why what he's done is legal. Mm-hmm. A criminal charge can arise out of a civil matter. So, I'm not the lawyer the lawyers, the judges, they will be the people that make the decision, that show it. Okay. And they're the people that will help. Now, what you brought up here is our GoFundMe thing. And I think that the one other thing that I think is really very telling in this case is that the moment that we put up the video, and I said in the video, the first one that we did, I said, look, don't take my word for it. Let this person speak for himself. Yeah. His name is Alec Peters. He's the producer of Axe 9. He's the one that sued me. And then you can watch his behavior, the screaming and the yelling and the threats, especially the threats of lawsuits, the claims that he's a lawyer when he's not a lawyer. All of these things, don't take my word for if he's a good or bad person, because that's kind of irrelevant. I think you should take his word for what kind of person he is. And what I think is very relevant is the moment that we put this up, he put a DMCA strike and said that his likeness was his copyright. So he wants to go online, scream at people, make disparaging comments. And when you use his video to highlight what he said, he claims copyright over it and then does a copyright strike against you, which is not fair. Listen, it's fair usage. I mean, you're reporting on what someone said, right? Mm-hmm. And so why would you do a DMCA takedown if you weren't afraid of what was being said? And what he's afraid of is people seeing who he is, which is not me making an accusation about the guy, but actually his own behavior. He doesn't want people to see who he really is. And so we had to put a new video up and it got taken down, and another one up and it got taken down. We had to make a new video and now we've had to make a third. This is the third video up right there. Right. And I'm telling you right now, he literally publicly went online today and said, I'm going to take that one down. It's my copyright. And that's like, well, go watch it before he does, because you need to see who this person is.
So what we're dealing with here is, I think the term that you used is a vexatious litigant.
Yes.
Somebody who files lawsuits, and that's their way of greedily accumulating things and destroying people's reputations while making money off of them.
Yeah.
I think is what the kind of the definition of a vexatious litigant, right? In this case, you're the target, mm-hmm. and this drags on. This drains your finances, because that's the legal things. Everybody in here knows doing anything with a lawyer costs a lot of money.
But not for him. It's basically free for him. He has a cheat code because he passed the bar in North Carolina and files his own stuff.
Right. But defending yourself against something like this is an extremely expensive proposition. Yep. So the GoFundMe was set up to help Paul defray the costs of this defense against this vexatious litigation. And this is just one example, right? Mm-hmm. This is one person, because you could have settled this out of court for some amount and it would have all been swept under the rug.
Yep.
But he would have gotten something from you that was not deserved.
It's not just that, Josh. I think that's that's one way of looking at it, but there are two ways of looking at it. Yes, he would have done, but then he already is saying, he's already made statements about the people he's going to be suing after this lawsuit. He's made public statements about all the people he's going to go sue, right? So think about that. If I don't get him in a courtroom, and I think it's up to us as a society, I think it's up to everybody, people listening, you know, friends that you have, it's up to us to decide if we're going to allow this in our hobbies, right? In the things that we love. You know, the things that we love cannot be appropriated by bad actors. They can't walk in and say, for example, let's boycott this person. Let's mess this person up. Let's all do things in the name of our fandom, because fandom is for everybody, right? And people should be able to have their own expression of it. So you can't sort of like have someone come in to say Dungeons and Dragons and say, you know what, I play a rogue, and rogues are the only ones that are good and everyone else is bad. And now I'm going to sue everybody that's not a rogue. So if you play a wizard, too bad for you, right? It almost amounts to that, right? Because it's tribalism, it's scaring people, it's blackmailing people, really, by saying, I'll sue you if you don't do this, right? Or you know, give me X amount of money. And yes, the money he receives, he literally, there's on the video that's on there, you can see him say, well, I just won another I just got another settlement, and that gives me enough money to go do another one of my cases. Like, he brags about it. So as a society, will we allow that? Will anyone watching this allow their hobby to be overwhelmed by somebody like this? And what I usually say is, if you cannot contribute, spread the word. Think of maybe this. I've spent 3 years trying to fight this individual to make sure he comes to justice in front of a judge, because he's never been in a court of law. So out of respect to that 3 years that I've taken on and my family has taken on, which has been really, really bad, could you do 30 minutes of work for us? Could you come with our GoFundMe and go to people that you care about and that and say, hey, I care about this issue. I don't have any money, but, hey, Dad, would you give $10 into this thing? Like, it's almost like doing half an hour of your own time, maybe, if you can't afford to donate. Because if we get this guy in a courtroom, he's going to have to explain to a judge and jury what he's done to all these people over all these years. And when he does that, that's when he's going to be in for a horrible, terrible, no good day. And we need this. We collectively need these people to stop.
And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you on the show, was so we could share that with folks and let people know. You guys see the GoFundMe page here. Please, if you can, go and support. In this case, it's Paul Jenkins. It's somebody that we as comic book fans know, love, and respect. But it's not. Paul is just he's the one standing in the gap right now. But there are a lot of other people who are the subject of these same kind of things. And as he mentioned, other people have brought these things to Paul too. So it's not just him. It's just in this one instance. This is a way that we can help. So I would beseech you, if you can, to pitch in and help support. Go to the GoFundMe. If you can't, as Paul said, talk to other people who can. Somebody who's got a few bucks, and a little bit from a lot of people adds up to a lot.
Yeah, it does. And I think what we get then is that maybe it's time for us. There's a thing that I talk about in politics, because I don't do politics, right? Because every time I see politicians saying things, they say in absolutes, this is it. And you're like, it's not it, right? Like, no matter where you're from, like, you're not right about everything, right? And so I don't really do politics. But
you're too punk for politics. I think
yeah. And I suppose if you were to talk to me, I'm like outside. But if I'm outside, I'm like outside right in the middle, because I want to listen to people and listen to their ideas, right? We have all these very challenging things that are always going to be very difficult, hot buttons, like immigration and things like that, right? They're all part of our lives. And so we want to talk about them and understand them and know things. We don't want to just get one opinion and say, that's my opinion, right? And so as we do this, what I began to realize years ago was that you're never going to see a 1,000,000-man moderate march, right? The people in the middle, which is almost everybody, right, and not the ones that are screaming and punching and kicking and threatening. It's the people over here. But those of us who actually live in the real world, we just want things to be right. And we know what's right and wrong. We might disagree about some elements of it, but we know what's right and wrong. And I want those people to have a voice. And we need to start pushing back together. And one way to push back is to take people like this and to say, you know what, let's, in a legal, metaphorical sense, let's bloody their nose first. Let's get them back. Let's stop them from doing this, okay? So that when they try to do it again, they have an example of, like, maybe I shouldn't do that because that can end really badly, right? I think it's time for us to collectively do that, and I hope that people agree with me.
Absolutely. I mean, there have to be penalties to deter people from doing things that taking advantage of people and ruining people's names and reputations unjustly. There have to be. Now, one thing, this is Alan, by the way. He was able to tune in here. So classic Alan.
Classic Alan.
Supposed to be on the show, and here he is coming in at the end. Classic Alan. Get over COVID, man. Hope you're all right. And Daniel brings up a point here too. That would be a whole different fight, I think. But but that's the plan. So here's how this will work, right? So he notoriously has had plenty of judgments against him, and he's never paid a penny. He currently is actually threatening to A, file personal bankruptcy, which you can't really file in advance, and B,
says basically, I'm judgment proof. I got no money, as he sits in front of a wall of props that are worth like hundreds of thousands of dollars. It doesn't matter. Say anything, right? If you're these people, say anything. It's all true because you made it true. But in the end, it will be this, that we'll get to the end of it. And once that happens, right, then that's what needs to happen. And we'll address what happens next afterwards. I may never get the money back that I've put into this, but I'll tell you this, at a certain point, especially after interviewing some of the people that he had hurt, I was like, I'm never going to let this continue on my watch. No way. I guess if not me, who? And if not now, when?
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. Again, it's one of the things that I saw this and I said, this is an opportunity. I've wanted to have you on the show for a long time, but this is an opportunity to come on and get an important message out. And I really appreciate you coming on and doing that.
This is a great question. We're ending better, right? Okay. You want top 5? Here we go.
Now, Brandy can talk this stuff with you too. This is her bailiwick.
The Stranglers, right? The Ruts, the Vibrators, probably the Buzzcocks and 999. There you go. Those are the top punk bands. I sort of got a soft spot for Dag Nasty, but that's because I used to play in a band with the drummer from Dag Nasty. So,
as you should, you should.
Right.
Just didn't. Oh, no, we didn't want to hear you cough all night. That's true.
Classic Alan. Alan.
That's brilliant. It occurred to me, and I should have thought of this earlier, but because I'm racking my brain here, and I've got a lot. Believe it or not, there's a lot going on in there. But it's another bone I think I have to pick with you. It's less of a bone than the Cobra Commander thing and not getting enough of that. But I believe it was a book you did with Aftershock.
Mm-hmm.
Had the corgi in it.
Oh, yeah. Beyonders. Yeah.
And you had the code.
That's right.
Did anyone decipher the daggum code? Because that was like, we had people to shop like poring over things.
Did you have...
We had the poster up.
Did you have the clues that we needed?
Yeah.
Okay, so what do you remember? The clues?
We think we did.
Okay, what were the clues?
I do not remember. It's been a minute. I just remember that last time I talked with Joe Pruitt, he was like, nobody got that code.
Yeah. So here are the clues. The first clue is just the word masquerade.
Okay.
Now, I can elaborate on it. It's a treasure hunt. So you've got Google, look up treasure hunt masquerade. You'll probably find something. Then all you need to do is to hear the word bad dog.
Okay.
That's it. Masquerade and bad dog, and you can find it.
Okay.
And the corgi in it, by the way, was my corgi Shadwell.
Well, the minute you said corgis earlier and you were talking about them running down the mountain hurting the cows, I immediately flashed to this book and said, that's where that corgi came from.
Shadwell was my corgi when I did Ninja Turtles, and everybody in town knew him. I would drive along, and people knew me because I had a British accent in Northampton, Massachusetts. So people were, hey, Jenks, how's it going? They'd know me. But if Shadwell was in my truck with me, he'd poke his head out the window, and just the whole town. He was like Norm from the old TV show Cheers. Like people go, Shadwell, as he went by, and he just like drive there with his tongue hanging out. He went everywhere with me, and I loved him very
happy
very
as
much.
A lark, I'm sure.
Yeah, he was a great dog. Yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. There you
go. No, bad dog is just the clue you need.
Yeah, just the clue. The clue. For anybody who doesn't know, Paul wrote a book called The Beyonders for Aftershock, which was a great book. It's all this discovery and finding things, and this is right up my alley, that kind of stuff, right? Yeah. And when you started talking about the history of the valleys and the Salton Sea and all these things, just that's so the kind of thing that moves me, right?
Yeah.
But in the book, there was a code that was in the book, and you had to go and you had to decipher the code, and it was great. Oh, Brandy, sorry you got to take off, but that's all right. We are about to
Brandy.
To sign off anyway and let Paul go because he's on Eastern time, so he's an hour ahead of us.
Yeah, so Brandy, like literally heard my 5 bands and didn't go like, oh, that must have been decent choices because she liked the interview. Otherwise, you know, if she was like holding out a candle for the Clash, right, and I didn't say the Clash, then I guess I might have messed up, you know.
No, she's a big fan of music and punk in general. I'm not so much a punk fan, and I'm a musician too, but I sing in choirs and a cappella groups and things, and I've got to sing all over the world and experience all kinds of wonderful things because of that.
Yeah, music is great. I love it, and it's what I spend my time doing when I can, you know. And like I said, I'm working on a project with some musicians right now, so I'm really excited about it, you know, because like writing, you know, writing music, and being, you know, so lucky to do something creative for a living, right? How lucky are we that we get to do that, right? And so I'm working with these musicians right now on a project which I think is going to be great. So let's see how that plays out.
Yeah, let us know what you've got going on. We'll absolutely tag in for that too. I will say, for all the folks like you who are creators, for those of us who are not creators in the same sense, I think it's great that we have those people like you who create these things so that we can enjoy them and think about them and you know, be inspired by them. So we laugh, we cry, you know, all those things. And I'm going to go back and read some Hellblazer issues now with a little bit more granularity and a little bit more knowledge to do so. So I'll be looking for the story behind the story.
Yeah, you'll see.
I'm really excited for that. Actually, that's going to be great.
You'll see Rich the Punk, and you'll know who he is. And I think when you read the one that's called Rich the Punk Psychic Sleuth, he actually takes Hellblazer, the title, and he just nails over the top of it, and he writes a sign that says Rich the Punk Psychic Sleuth, and he goes on his own adventure for one issue, and it's literally, what if my brother was in the magical arena? You know, it'd be great, right?
I tell you, if I ever run into him, I'm going to have to get him to sign a copy of a book.
He'd love that. He would love that, yeah.
But yeah, absolutely do that. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for fighting the good fight and standing up for people who are being bullied, for a lack of a better term, in this legal sense. And for anybody who can, again, go to the GoFundMe. We'll post a link to it. But go to the GoFundMe, support Paul in this, support all creators who are going through similar things. Because if you want to keep enjoying the things that people create, they have to be able to create them, and they have to be able to do that free from fear of being harassed and sued and driven into bankruptcy and having their reputations destroyed. So support these folks. That's really, really important for us.
And one thing you can do as well, everyone, go to stoptoxicfandom.com, stoptoxicfandom.com, and you will find, because it's pretty much a holding page, but it gives you some links into some of the stuff. Like one of the things it gives you links to, the person in question, you know, with the Axonar project, you know, we published the bank accounts from that thing that we acquired, that a lot of people have. And when we publish those bank accounts, you can match it up to his own records that he gave to CBS and see that there's a lot of discrepancies. And let's just say that the usage of money, remember, this is people like you that donated to a Kickstarter and Indiegogo campaign because they thought they were going to get a Star Trek movie made. So the idea that those people funded, say, a trip to Nottingham in the home of Warhammer to buy $5,000 worth of Warhammer toys, or a painting, or a personal prop that cost about $9,000, you know, you didn't pay for any of that, right? It's not what you paid for. And so if you then want to understand it and you have a question about it, I think that people should ask those questions of this person specifically. And maybe we should ask questions. And this is a great ending moment. Look, here he is. This is my guy.
Oh, and he's a black cat too. Kaylee's going to be in love.
He is by far the most special guy I've ever had. His name is Claudius because of his claws.
And do you spell it with a W?
Yeah, with a W, yeah. And he is a brilliant, amazing little guy. He's like he's a writer's cat. So he just sits right there near my computer, and he just sits and looks at me all day as I write. It's great.
Oh, see, I knew this was going to be. Kayleesa has a black cat, and she's a big fan of cats in general. But yeah, I told you our folks love cats.
Yeah.
So he was going to close the door before the show started to keep the cat from jumping up in the screen. I said, no, don't do that. Now this is a 10 out of 10 episode.
There you go.
You sealed the deal, Claudius. Well done.
Claudius. Yeah, he's the guy.
Well done. Well done. Well, thank you so much for coming on. We greatly appreciate it. And we look forward to talking to you sometime soon. I will be sure to send this glorious
do that
gallery to you.
Thank you.
Do you want the Mark Waid picture that inspired
you?
Oh,
I have to, yeah, because then I can go make fun of Waid. I'll send it to him and say, look, my art was way better than yours.
The story of how that unfolded, because you weren't going to do it. You were not up for it. And when I said you could destroy Mark Waid, you were like, oh, yeah, I could do that.
Mark and I have been really good friends for a long time, and we have a kind of a mutual admiration side. He's a good guy. And
yeah, that convention, if he wants to think back to it, it was the one where right when CrossGen was falling apart.
Oh yeah.
And he was very angry with CrossGen, and he was at the convention, and they had Mark Waid, and underneath it they had CrossGen, and he had gone through and like.
That's like Spinal Tap with Puppet Show. Puppet Show and Spinal Tap. Yeah.
He was very unhappy about it, but that was the show where I got those from you guys, the very first ones.
I think Claudius has had enough of me talking.
Yeah, he's like, stop talking. You need to stop. But sincerely, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Really appreciate it. And you guys all have a great night. We will catch you next week. Hopefully, Alan will, get over this COVID, and he'll be fine, and he'll come back and join us. But we have a video. We used to do a quiz show. It was kind of a trivia show, and then we morphed it into just more talking and such, because it was a lot of pressure to come up with those questions every week, and that was the pressure. So we have this little ending video from the quiz show that it will take you right back to a 1980s video game, and it's great. So that's what we're going to sign out with.